Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome to this second special bonus video of the Phantom Perspectives. Yep, we're going to be talking about Danny Phantom again. So, the last time I touched this franchise, I looked at the epilogue graphic novel to the series, A Glitch in Time, and I thought it was a pretty damn good book. Now, I did have a couple problems with it here and there, most especially the finale, which still gets on my nerves even now, but overall, I thought A Glitch in Time was a fantastic read. I thought it wrapped up a lot of the loose threads from the series rather well. I liked the story and what it did. I love the character development for Danny. I love the character growth for Dark Danny and Vlad. I love the action. I love the I loved what we saw. I love the character stuff. I just loved everything that is showcased, and overall, I thought it was just a really damn good book. With again, the only exception being the finale, kind of undoing a lot of the world building they did throughout it. So, yeah, that was a thing. But overall, ultimately though, I thought it was really good, and a lot of people agreed with me. A Glitch in Time was considered a proper follow-up to Danny Phantom, as everyone loved it, thought it did everything right in terms of being a follow-up to the series, and as such, when you have something that's successful, a sequel is bound to be made. Which brings us to the topic of today's video, as today, we will be talking about Danny Phantom, Fair Game, the direct sequel to A Glitch in Time. Now, honestly, I didn't really know what to expect with this one. Now, looking at the cover for it, I did sort of have some slight reservations, mostly because it's clear that this book was going to be focusing on Valerie. And me and Valerie as a character is complicated. I mean, I think she's a good character, but by virtue of her being a rival for Danny and been thinking all ghosts are evil, there were parts of her personality that always just sort of rubbed me the wrong way. It's not that, again, it doesn't mean that she's a bad character, it's just my personal feelings. I think that ultimately she is a good character, and I do like how the show addressed her conflict with Danny, which I still thought was a pretty damn good conflict because it was various shades of gray, and I thought it worked to the show's advantage. But the thing is, one of the flaws of the series when it ended was that that relationship was never touched on properly. In fact, as I mentioned when I went back over talking about Phantom Planet, she was just thrown on a garbage truck and then forgotten about, with the only bit of follow-up we got for her being A Glitch in Time. And the thing is, A Glitch in Time left the door open for her because when everything went down in that series, she was one of the few people who remembered what happened in the original timeline, which I'll get into in case you haven't seen that video. But the thing is, and so to have a book kind of following up on that, it's natural. It makes sense for why they would do it. But at the same time, it does make me wonder what they would do with the story. How would they expand on what happened at the end of A Glitch in Time? How would they grow from it? Well, let's talk about this book and find out. And of course, before we get to my full thoughts on it, we gotta get through our long-ass plot summary. So, let's recap A Glitch in Time briefly. So, after the events of Phantom Planet, Vlad wound up going to Clockwork in an attempt to try and undo all of his past mistakes. Clockwork basically gave Vlad the rough equivalent of up yours, which resulted in the pair of them fighting. However, in the midst of their struggle, the Fenton Thermos that had Dark Danny in it wound up getting damaged and eventually released Danny's evil Dark Doppelganger. And as recompense, he wound up attacking the pair, specifically Clockwork, and wound up merging with Clockwork to gain control of his time powers and, well, screwing over the time stream something fierce. As such, Vlad wound up fleeing the Ghost Zone to Fenton Works and wound up going to Danny and his friends for help. And while the trio was dubious of Vlad's intentions because, well, it's Vlad, the spectral energies they were getting from the Ghost Zone were at least somewhat confirming his story, and so they decided to help him. Unfortunately, they couldn't really face Dark Danny in their current states because, well, Danny's powers had been glitching and not as strong ever since the Disasteroid incident. As such, Vlad told the group that there was a source of ultimate power in the Ghost Zone, and so he, Danny, Sam, and Tucker all went to the Ghost Zone to try and find the source of that ultimate power, while Jazz stayed behind the human world to try and prep Amity Park for Dark Danny. Eventually, the group did find the source of this power, and it turns out it wasn't really a true source of ultimate power, I guess, but was rather just an explanation of what ghosts truly are, just raw emotions that are just left behind. And as such, when Danny realizes this and realizes that the divide between ghosts and humans is not a natural one, well, he does explain that ever since the Disaster incident, he'd been feeling like he lacked a purpose because, well, the world no longer needed him. However, knowing what he knows now, it does give him a renewed purpose, wanting to be the bridge between the human and ghost worlds. And as such, he wound up getting, with that new determination, it wound up giving him it gave him a better sense of calm with himself and a better understanding of his emotions, which in turn gave him full access to his powers again. As such, Danny and Crow went back to the human world, and at that point, Dark Danny was already wrecking everything everybody's shit, and as such, Danny and Co. wound up fighting against Dark Danny, and they wound up proving victorious. With Vlad even having his own heel face turn when he was basically confronted with all the darker aspects of himself when he realized that Dark Danny was made from his raw emotions as well. However, rather than trapping Dark Danny like they did before, Danny instead wanted to help his dark self, because the raw emotions that made up Dark Danny were loss, anger, regret, lust for power, and control. And all of these emotions were, and basically a lot of what he was doing was just him, well, just having trouble processing his pain. And as such, Danny wanted to help him, which was easier said than done because during the battle he was separated from Clockwork, and well, since his timeline has been erased, he's vanishing from existence. As such, Vlad offered himself as temporary storage for Dark Danny, and from there they wound up bringing Dark Danny to a spare clone of Danny that Vlad had on standby, and well, that's where Dark Danny now resides, as he's overshadowed the clone and now controls it as his own. In the meantime, though, the damage to the timeline that Dark Danny had done was so immense that that Clockwork needed the power of all of the time medallions that Danny and Co. had, as they grabbed them before they confronted Dark Danny. And as such, using the power of the time medallions, he was able to mend the timeline somewhat, but because of all the damage Dark Danny had done, he couldn't repair it exactly as it was, and as a result, he created two new timelines. One that was exactly like the original, except Danny didn't have his ghost powers, and another where the Disasteroid incident still happened, but Danny's involvement was basically removed, so nobody would know that Danny Fenton and Danny Phantom were one and the same. As such, Danny wound up choosing that door because he still wanted to be the bridge between ghosts and humans, and as a result, he not only returned to an Amity Park where nobody knew that he was Danny Phantom, but where Danny Phantom was now public enemy number one because everyone thought that he was responsible for the Disasteroid incident, and thus Amity Park decided that they were going to try and better arm themselves against ghosts in the future so they could just properly eradicate them. So, you know, that was a thing. Also, Danny's parents no longer know he's a superhero again because why the fuck not? Why do they need to be involved? It's not like they can be allies or anything. Let's keep them in the dark. They're stupid. They don't think smart. They wouldn't understand. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I still hate that, okay? It still gets to me, and it's never gonna not get to me, okay? Regardless, though, Danny once more decided to stick to his guns and try and be the bridge between the human and ghost worlds. But unfortunately, it turns out there was one other survivor from the original timeline, namely Valerie, who it turns out still kept the time medallion that Danny and Co. gave her, and thus she managed to slip into this new timeline alongside everyone else, which is actually where this book begins, as the book actually begins with Danny and Valerie both getting ready for their respective days at school. And since Amity Park is now trying to arm its students with as much anti-ghost knowledge as possible, it turns out there are actually ghost curriculums now at the Amity Park High School. And of course, Danny's parents are eating that shit up because they're the leading ghost experts. So they think that their kids are just going to be A-okay. Although Jazz is freaking the hell out because she has absolutely no idea if classes like this could actually get her into a proper Ivy League school. However, as Danny and Jazz go off to high school, they are armed by their parents with a new Fenton device. Basically, it's an atomizer for ghosts. Basically, point at a ghost and it'll basically just annihilate them, reduce them down to their basest elements, and just rip them apart on a molecular level. In other words, it'll rip them apart atom by atom, or molecule by molecule. I don't care. Point is, Danny's a little hesitant to have this, but he takes it nonetheless. However, Jazz runs ahead to school because she kind of wants to try and fix everything. But in the meantime, Danny meets back up with Sam and Tucker, and yeah, things are now a lot more complicated in this timeline. Like, serious, because yeah, there's just a lot of unpacking to do here. Because things look familiar enough in this version of Amity Park, but yeah, going from the world's greatest hero to public enemy number one is definitely going to be a bit of an adjusting period. And everyone in Amity Park is out for not only Danny's blood, but for every ghost. And since Danny now wants to make it his mission to be the bridge between humans and ghosts, he can't exactly just go up to ghosts and start punching and shooting like he did back in the original series. He's trying to find a more nuanced way of dealing with spirits. Again, which is easier said than done. And as for Valerie, well, while she still retains her memories of the original timeline, she's still not exactly in the in crowd. Her dad ultimately, I mean, don't get me wrong, her father is still is actually doing better here. I mean, he hasn't gotten rich yet, and is not popular, and hasn't gotten his job back, but there is a greater demand for ghost tech this time around, and as such he's been working on a new, basically a ectonet. It's basically just for catching ghosts, and he believes that if he can perfect this design, he can sell it to their old company, which I think is called Axion, and he thinks that they'll be able to at least get his foot in the door for getting his job back. Of course, Valerie sees the design for this thing and basically wants to try it out, but her dad is still not okay with her hunting ghosts. Don't get me wrong. He's more willing to tolerate her ghost hunting job because, well, hunting ghosts is now becoming a part of the Amity Park curriculum. Well, that being said, he still doesn't want her touching his things. She takes it anyway, though. But once her dad's back's turned, she takes it. So whatever. But when she does go to school, while she tries to just kind of blend right in, because new timeline, she thinks maybe she can get a fresh start. Unfortunately, her former cool friends are still giving her the cold shoulder because they're all vapid, shallow airheads. Go figure. However, as Danny and Co. and Valerie end up going into school, they end up Danny's ghost sense goes off, alerting him that there's a ghost nearby. As such, he and his friends end up scouring the school to try and find it, and sure enough, they end up finding Wolf, who's hiding in a nearby trash can. Of course, Wolf is happy to see Danny, and Danny's like, well, what are you doing here? And Wolf basically tells Danny that he's here with a friend, and he ends up pointing to a nearby dumpster. And when Danny goes to check the dumpster, he finds another wolf ghost, a tinier one, kind of like a pup. And, well, this one is, I'm just going to say, a bit more feral, as while it does look harmless enough, when Danny tries getting too close to it, it keeps slashing at him. So unfortunately, Danny can't really get into a conversation with this thing. And either way, it's clear that this little thing is with Wolf. But as Danny keeps trying to get answers and get close to this creature, it keeps swiping at him, only for someone to end up shooting at the group and yelling, "Get away from him," which causes Wolf and this other little ghost to just go running. And unfortunately, the nearest place they can run to is the Amity Park High School. And, well, they end up running inside and end up causing a bit of a frenzy because these are two giant werewolf-like ghosts just ripping the place apart. As such, Valerie decides that it's time for her to gear up as she gets into her suit and starts hunting Wolf and this other ghost. Since Danny and his friends are trying to protect ghosts and be the bridge between worlds, they actively start hindering Valerie. As such, Wolf and this other little ghost get away, but it does lead to a bit of, but basically, hold on one second. Sorry about that. Had to look up the book. But yeah, basically, Wolf and this other little ghost get away. More specifically, the little ghost ends up running into the nearby woods, while Wolf ends up opening a tear in time and space and flees through that. Everyone in Amity Park High School end up seeing Valerie try to take out the two ghosts, and everyone thinks that was awesome. They're actually impressed with her prowess. And as such, all the cool kids start cozying up to her, being like, "Oh man, you're awesome. I want to be friends with you again." And so she manages to get her social life back, which Valerie's okay with. But when it comes down to Danny's friends, they're still at the bottom of the totem pole because they actively hindered Valerie. But that doesn't really matter because Danny's friends are wondering, where the hell is Danny? Why didn't he show up? And that's because after Wolf and this other little ghost got blasted by someone off panel, Danny wound up going to investigate to see who it was. And who should he run into? But Danielle! Yep, Danielle's in this book, and Danny is of course happy to see his gender-bent clone. As such, Danny and Danielle meet back up with Danny's friends, and they just kind of start exchanging notes. As Danielle says that she's actually enrolled in Amity Park High School. How? She wound up overshadowing the lady that was in charge of all this and wound up making herself her own record. So hey, she's now Danielle McCool, and she's now enrolled in high school, which she wants to do just because she wants to try it out for whatever reason. As such, As such, Danielle is actually more than happy to be hanging out with Danny because, well, she wants to go back to busting ghosts with him, you know, like the old times, just kicking ass, taking names and so forth. But Danny and Co. basically end up sitting her down and saying they're not doing that anymore, much to her own shock, as they tell her that they're trying to actually, you know, communicate with ghosts, actually talk to them, learn what makes them tick and so forth, which Danielle doesn't fully wrap her head around, but she is at least trying to see their viewpoint since, well, she trusts Danny. Unfortunately, though, as Danny and Co are still talking with Danielle, they end up getting passed by the cool kids, or more specifically Valerie, who seems a bit more antagonistic to Danny this time around, which Danny is a bit concerned about. But Danielle thinks that maybe they could try and do something because, well, going back to one of the final episodes of season 3, Valerie helped Danny with Danielle, so maybe she's not all bad. But ultimately, the topic is raised about where the hell is Danielle staying, because, well, she's enrolled in school, she has to be staying somewhere, and it turns out she's been living out of the boiler room in the school, which actually leads to a rather funny panel where she complains about her roommate, and we cut to the boiler room and see that Cindy Poindexter is just tied up down there. I don't know why. I love that. That's just mean, and I love that. But Danny thinks that he can do Danielle one better, as he and his friends take Danielle back to Fenton Works and basically try sneaking her in under his parents' radar. Doesn't really work. Jack ends up picking up on it right away, which is actually a bit of a surprise since it's Jack, but Danny and his friends have a cover story saying that Danielle is their second cousin once removed, that they saw at a family reunion or something, and of course she would have noticed that, and so she needs a place to stay for the moment, and so Jack does end up letting her stay in, I guess, a sub-basement. Hold on one second, can check it right now. The Fenton Stockades. Yeah, they have that down there, apparently. Don't ask me how it got there. Maybe it was there when the house was built. I don't fucking know. Point is, it's out of commission because it apparently breaks the Geneva Convention, so hey, Danielle can stay down there. As such, Danielle gets set up down there, and, well, she wants to go patrol with Danny and Co. And so the quartet end up flying out of Fenton Works as they decide they need to find Wolf and his little friend, which is easier said than done because, unfortunately, this evening Valerie and her friends are out hunting ghosts as well, and of course Valerie is showing off her ghost hunting tech. And I give credit, and I give credit that I do like seeing Valerie being more active in that, but at the same time, I don't like these idiots. Which is actually something the book touches on, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Point is, they're making things a little bit more difficult. However, eventually Danny does end up crossing paths with... Danny and Danielle do eventually cross paths with this little ghost again. Sorry, I gotta go check it. This is the first time I read the book, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. But yeah, eventually Danny and Danielle end up finding this little wolf, and, well, Danny does try, again, hold on one second, I'm sorry. Again, sorry, certain details I need to get straight in my head. But basically, Danny tries talking with this little wolf, but going back to Valerie and her friends, Valerie's tech ends up picking up the ectosignatures of Danny, Danielle, and this little wolf, and of course, Valerie and them are chomping at the bit to go after them, and so they end up trying to zero in on them thanks to Valerie's tech. Unfortunately, though, they end up getting intercepted by Wolf, and Wolf ends up fighting with Valerie and her friend. Ends up fighting with Valerie and her friends. And as such, once this little wolf ends up hearing Wolf's howl, well, it ends up kind of going on the offensive as it ends up going after Danny, which causes Danielle to go on the offensive as she ends up blasting at this creature and then pulls out the Fenton thermos and sucks it in because she thinks it was the best option, which Danny immediately ends up calling Danielle out on because they told her earlier to not use that shit unless it was an emergency, and Danielle thought that this constituted an emergency, but Danny basically starts kind of chewing her out because he's getting frustrated. That any time they usually spend together has never been more than a 48-hour period, and right now she's treating this all like it's a game, that it's all fun, but this is something very serious for him, and she needs to understand that. But Danielle basically gets upset for being yelled at for what she used to think was the right thing to do. And as such, in a huff, she ends up throwing the Fenton thermos down and denting it, which in turn does release this little wolf, but she ends up flying away because she doesn't want to hang out with Danny anymore because she's hurt by him yelling at her, which Danny is a bit regretful for, But unfortunately, that's when the conflict with Wolf gets close to him, and he ends up and he and the rest of the group and he and his friends end up duking it out with Valerie and the dumbass cool kids. During this conflict, Valerie does end up pulling out the Ecto-Net device that her dad created and tries to use it to trap Wolf, but unfortunately doesn't do well. It shocks him, but all that does is just piss him off before he cuts through the net and gets away, even opening up another gateway. But since Danny is, of course, public enemy number one, that means the cool kids are directing their attention to him as well, which I find hilarious. During the series, they idolized Danny, which I don't know. That still annoys me. The fact that everyone just turned on Danny so fast, but different timeline or whatever. I don't fucking know. But while Danny is able to apprehend them, Valerie is a much harder sell, because Valerie at least has more experience with hunting ghosts, and so she and Danny do end up clashing, and in the midst of their struggle, they end up going to a separate part of the forest, and during their struggle, Danny tries to talk with Valerie, since when they work together when they save Danielle in the series, they seem to have an understanding. But then Valerie lets slip that she knows that Danny Phantom is Danny Fenton. And while Danny tries playing dumb, Valerie ends up pulling open her suit to reveal that she still has the time medallion, which Danny is shocked by. And this also leads to another reason why Valerie is giving Danny the even colder shoulder this time around. She's angry that Danny ditched her. So while Valerie and Danny were coming to a slight understanding ever since the incident with Danielle and the Disastroid and what have you, they never truly saw eye to eye. And even in another scene, even in the scene that happens immediately after this in the book, Danny admits that after the Disastroid incident, he never went to talk to Valerie. He never said anything to her about what was going on. They never had time to register their emotions. He just avoided her. And that actually would explain why Valerie still had some animosity towards Danny in the last book, because there was a lot of things that were left unsaid between the pair of them that unfortunately they needed to address and never did get addressed. It was just all left hanging in the air. And then comes Dark Danny. The pair of them end up working together and they take Dark Danny down. Only for them to immediately ditch Valerie and try and put the timeline back and leave her behind. Again, they were not aware that Valerie had the time medallion. So Danny was more than willing to make Valerie go back to being how she was before, not knowing that Danny Fenton was Danny Phantom, even though they were supposed to be friends. They were supposed to be allies. And Valerie is justifiably pissed about that she was just forgotten, just thrown aside, treated like less than nothing, as just another side character in this thing, even though she did her part, and she and Danny are supposed to be close. And it explains a lot of her animosity. And unfortunately, fortunately, the only favor that she's going to be giving Danny at this point is that she won't reveal his secret identity, and even that's hanging by a thread, because she basically tells Danny, stay out of my way or I tell everyone. And since Danny is public enemy number one, yeah, that's not going to be good for anybody. It's at this point where Danny is able to take care of the cool kids, and Wolf is able to escape. But once the cool kids get free, and at this point Danny ends up leaving as well. And even taking his friends with him, because they wound up helping him try and fend off the cool kids, which even they noticed. But basically, the cool kids are just like, well, what? It's like, well, what are we gonna do? And something I kind of love about this book is that Paulina, despite the fact that she's part of the cool kids, is the one of the few that genuinely did not want Valerie back. Because, yeah, Valerie may be a cool ghost hunter, but they didn't actually see her catching any ghosts, is what I'm saying. And so, as a result, she just has no... basically, she just thinks that Valerie is well, she doesn't say she's a poser, but at the same time, she's like, really, are you as cool as everyone says you are? And she even takes this incident as another example, because Valerie is able to go toe-to-toe with that giant wolf and Danny Phantom, but she didn't actually catch anybody. And so she thinks that maybe the cool Kid should have a new leader, which the dumbasses even seem to even start to kind of consider. But Valerie assures them that she can do this, that she can be a good ghost hunter. She just needs to perfect this net first, and so as such, she ends up leaving, and this, of course, does lead to the scene with Danny and his friends as Danny tries to talk with them, and even lets them know that Valerie remembers everything because she still has her time medallion. And what I like is that Tucker and Sam are not siding with Danny in this argument because Danny does once more go into the fact that he never talked to Valerie after the Disasteroid incident, and her feelings are pretty justified. So while Danny thinks that maybe they should get the medallion away from her, well, even they both admit that Danny might be a bit in the wrong on this as well. Especially what I love too is that this scene does still outright confirm that Danny and Sam are still a couple. And again, and Sam even says, no, Valerie may have a point on this. You haven't been entirely innocent here. I like that. Nice stuff. Gives him a bit of hard reality. As for Valerie, she does manage to make it home, but her dad is there waiting for her, and he basically calls her out for taking his stuff. And so he does get upset, and so he gets upset with her and basically grounds her. But Valerie does tell him that the net didn't even work. And as such, while he's still angry with her, he does at least ask for specifics about why it didn't work. And she mentioned how the net, while the net was able to trap the ghost, it was able to rip through it, and all that electrical stun did that was just make it angrier. As such, Valerie's dad thinks that he can try and work out the kinks, though he's still angry at Valerie. But Valerie thinks that she can improve it as well. Going back to the struggle that she had with Danny, during the struggle, Danny lost the Fenton atomizer, and Valerie found it. And so Valerie takes this thing, and she thinks that if she can integrate this into the net, then she can make it even more effective. But what about Danielle in all this? What happened to her? Well, she still feels like shit. She's upset that Danny has changed, and because things are now a lot more complicated. She can't just bust ghosts for the sake of busting ghosts. She doesn't know what to do anymore. And, well, as she talks about this, she ends up running into... Wolf ends up coming across her, and the two of them start kind of having an understanding, and it's nice and sweet and all that. And of course, Wolf doesn't speak English, he speaks Esperanto, so whatever he says to Danielle, she can't understand. Only for someone to come out of the shadows and act as a translator. And at first, Danielle thinks it's Danny, based on his body shape, but then she gets a better look at him. And she's half right. It's a Danny, but it's not her Danny. It's Dark Danny. Yep, we're getting a follow-up with him. And I freaked the hell out when I saw him in the book, because what I love is because it's so clearly him. Like, the first time you see him, you see the outline of his ghostly form in the background. Actually, let me see if I can find it. It's a really good shot. It's really good, and I do want to see, and I do think it deserves to get looked at. Yeah, this is the shot of Dark Danny, if the glares anything go by. I love that. The blue flame and the red eyes. And I gotta say right now, I love his outfit. I love that that his hairstyle is Danny's hairstyle, but with a gray streak in there, which I think is fitting for him. And his clothes just look like a typical angsty teen bad boy, as he has like a tweed jacket with a tie loosely hanging around it, a black t-shirt, and just jeans. He looks just like an angsty teenager, and he fits the archetype rather well because the thing is, it's Dark Danny! And while he may be trying to find a new leaf, he's still an asshole. And actually what I love here is the reason why he's out and about here is because he needed a break from Vlad. Apparently Vlad as a father is a dork. Just a dork. When Danielle hears that, she fully understands because, well, she used to live with him. And what I love is that we do a little bit more about how Vlad is in his home life, and apparently well, there's a reason why Vlad and Jack were friends in college, besides the fact they were going for the same girl. Because apparently Vlad has his own embarrassing stuff at home. And one of which is lasagna night, which apparently is not only terrible lasagna, but every time he cooks it, there's usually a fire that breaks out, which I love. And we see that as Vlad briefly calls Dark Danny to check on him, and Dark Danny tells him to piss off before he smashes the phone. And we cut back to Vlad, he's like, oh damn it, that's the fourth phone of the week. freak. Why'd I have to have a teenage clone? It's great. I love it. I love it all. It's just amazing. I love this. I love seeing this. I love this conflict. I love seeing this coming out. So, yeah, I clearly love this. But what I also like, too, is that we do learn a bit more about Dark Danny's situation in this new timeline. Namely, while he's been able to stabilize himself in this new timeline by overshadowing this clone body, well, it's taking everything he has to keep it stable. You have to remember that Vlad's clones of Danny were not... well, they were all falling apart from the ground up. Even the clones that Danny fought in Danielle's debut episode were not good clones. They were bad clones, he put it, just rejects. And Danielle was just as much of a reject, as the more she used her ghost powers, the more she broke down. It was the whole reason why her episode in season 3 revolved around her trying to get healed. And so basically Dark Danny cannot use any of his ghost powers in his current state because it's taking all of those powers just to keep this body from falling apart. So he's kind of defenseless. As such, when Danielle gets this information, she decides that she wants to give that maybe that she and Dark Danny could stand to hang out with each other, especially since right now Wolf is out on his lonesome and might need some protection. So they're trying. So Danielle wants to help. So Danielle thinks this is a good idea. Of course, Dark Danny's not exactly going for it because he's Dark Danny and he doesn't do team ups. But hanging out with Danielle and staying out this long might piss off Vlad. So Dark Danny decides to go with it, with the pair of them hanging out well into the morning and keeping an eye on Wolf. As such, when the next day comes around, when Danny and his friends are walking the halls of Amity of high school, and Danny is trying to find the right words to say to Valerie, because the conversation with his friends did convince him that he needed to sit down and talk with Valerie, regardless of how complicated things were. Unfortunately, though, when he runs into Valerie, she's still hanging out with the cool kids, and Danny does try to talk with her, obviously trying to keep things a bit vague with all the people around, but basically the word equivalent is, I would like a truce. I know that I would like a truce, and I'm sorry. And while Valerie almost looks like that she's receptive to this, unfortunately her peanut gallery isn't taking any of this, and so she ends up going off with them. So, yeah, not exactly doing well in that regard. But Valerie herself also stays busy, as in a science lab, when she has some time alone, she's able to reconstruct the device that her dad made, but she ends up outfitting it with the Fenton atomizer, and well, she decides to test it out. And sure enough, she ends up testing it on this little stray ghost that she has in a cage, and it seems to work, as it ends up getting caught in the net. And when the net basically closes in on them, and the energy from the atomizer basically just destroys the ghost, annihilates it completely. So it does seem to look like it's a success. However, when the ghost is destroyed, it ends up blowing up into goop, which ends up getting all over Valerie. As such, Valerie thinks, well, whatever, it's fine. Fine. It seems to work. Maybe it needs a few kinks worked out, but it seems fine. Only for Valerie to freak out a bit and say, no, what if it's a failure like everything else I do in life? Which even Valerie's like, where the hell did that come from? Which is what eventually leads to her and Danny end up basically crossing paths in the high school later. In the meantime, though, back with Danielle and Dark Danny, eventually the pair keep trying to find ways to pass the time, and their search ends up bringing them to a carnival, as Wolf seems to go into there and even pulls a hood up to try and blend into the crowd. And Danielle ends up seeing this and thinks that she and Dark Danny could stand to have some fun and keep an eye on Wolf from a distance. But Dark Danny, I love how much of an angsty teen he's being in this book. He's just like, it's like he so desperately wants to blow everything up, but he can't, and he's stuck with it. But in the meantime, ultimately, he and Danielle are still stuck together, and so while Wolf is basically going through the park doing whatever the hell he wants, Danielle thinks that maybe now's the time for them to get into a little bit of mischief, because, well, she lived on the streets. Maybe they can start pickpocketing people to get some extra cash. And it turns out Dark Danny's all for this. But I love this. He basically acts as the little devil on her shoulder, which is both entertaining and frightening when you know Dark Danny's history. Regardless, though, basically the pair of Dannys end up going through the carnival, just acting like complete jackasses, which Danielle thinks that she is actually surprised by, because he seems to be going all in on this. And Dark Danny admits that this is something he's familiar with: crime, which I don't know. I don't know. It's nice seeing I like seeing Dark Danny. I just like seeing Dark Danny in a more formal setting. It's nice, okay? I like seeing the big bad evil guy actually doing some everyday shit. It's nice when you see a villain off the clock, is what I'm saying. I like it. It's nice. And pause for a second. I'm going to look something up in the book. Sorry. But yeah, basically, as Wolf continues looking through the carnival, he seems to zero in on a stall, which Lancer is actually working at. Apparently on a teacher's salary, he needed to get an extra job. And among the prizes, Wolf ends up recognizing someone. It's his little wolf companion. And so he ends up pulling her out, and while Lancer tries to tell Wolf to put her back because he thinks that she's she's one of the prizes and needs to pay for it, all it takes is Wolf baring his fangs and claws, and Lancer just decides to back off a little. As such, the group ends up seeing Wolf ends up coming back and meeting with Danielle and Dark Danny. Of course, Dark Danny couldn't give two shits about this, but as they're all catching up, a laser sight starts targeting Wolf, which, what I love is that Dark Danny immediately knows what it is, because, well, the source of this target is Valerie, which makes sense, because Dark Danny had quite a few run-ins with his Valerie and his Valerie, so it makes sense that he'd be able to recognize her tricks right from the get-go. Odds are he had to learn that rather quickly in his own timeline, because even in his world, Valerie was relentless. So he did have to keep an eye on her until he probably had to learn the tricks of the trade. But it also raises the question of how the hell Valerie is even here in the carnival. Well, after she finished improving the Ectonet, she wound up presenting it to the other cool kids, with Pauline, of course, being the most dubious, because Pauline is a bitch. But her gear wound up detecting Wolf's energy signature in the carnival, and so she and the other cool kids decided to ditch school and go hunt them, which is why they're here right now. But either way, Dark Danny and Danielle try and basically defend Wolf and his little pup, but things get more hectic when Danny ends up showing up, because he saw the group making a run for it, so he followed, and he does his best to try and defend Wolf, which is what basically leads to a whole all-out struggle across the carnival, as everyone's just fighting with one another. Danielle and Dark Danny are trying to do their best to defend Wolf, or more specifically, Danielle's trying to defend Wolf. Dark Danny's trying to defend her as best he can, because he's still very limited, and anytime he uses ghost powers, he ends up feeling pain. But in the midst of all the chaos, things begin blowing up. Valerie keeps trying to use her new weapon, and it causes more chaos and mayhem. To the point where they end up knocking over the Ferris wheel, which thankfully Valerie and Danny are able to help people, with Valerie blaming Danny for the interference because he got in her way. But throughout it all, unfortunately, during all of this, well, there is a tragedy. As at one point, Valerie did have Wolf in her sights and planned to try and shoot at him with the device, and his little cub wound up getting in the way. As she took the shot, and she wound up getting caught in the net. And just like the ghost back at the science lab, she's eradicated. And it is a rather gruesome sight, as when she gets destroyed, her remains end up getting spread all across the area. And it starts falling down like snow on her and the cool kids. And it's mortifying. And in the midst of all this chaos, Danny begins freaking out a bit because he was afraid that Danielle might have gotten hit with that same blast. But thankfully, she's fine. She got out of the way just in time and was able to throw up a shield to protect herself, and Dark Danny. But once Danielle sees what happened to Wolf's little pup, she begins freaking. She actually gets upset. Justifiably so. And of course, when Valerie sees Danielle, she recognizes her. In fact, she even saw her earlier in the book when she was eating lunch with Danny and co. But But Danielle sees this and she's mortified. Now Valerie, of course, tries justifying her reactions and saying, no, it's okay. I'll go. Look, ghosts are bad, but it's complicated. But Danielle's not hearing any of this. Like, it's like, what? All ghosts are evil? I'm a ghost too. Does that mean I'm evil? But she's like, well, yeah, all ghosts are evil, but you're not all ghosts. But Danielle's not hearing any of that shit. She wants nothing to do with Valerie, and she intentionally backs away from her. And what I love is that actually, let me show it. It's a really good picture. It's a really good picture. I want to see if I can find it. If I can get it. It's not bookmarked. I really should have. It's this image right here. The image of her backing away from Valerie. As you can see, Dark Danny just looming behind her. Actually, I think honestly, it's really damn good. And I think just shows how Danielle is unfortunately kind of sliding towards something darker. I love it. But then but the thing is, something happens with the snow because when Valerie does explain what the net did, that it atomized the ghost. Danny has to explain to Valerie that ghosts are all made of emotions, raw, strong emotions, and that by atomizing a ghost, basically completely destroying them, it's basically reduces them down to their barest emotions. And the thing is, before this pup was destroyed, she was going on a frenzy. She was angry. In fact, one of her abilities is that she can actually grow in size to the size of wool and go on a rampage. And she was like that just before she was destroyed. And unfortunately, those angry feelings didn't just go away. It drifts down onto the cool kids in Valerie, and it changes them. All of them start glowing. Their eyes turn red. They all get claws. They all get super strong, and all of them just go in a frenzy. And that's actually pretty scary. It actually is pretty scary. What I like too is that none of them are overshadowed per se. Like with ghosts, like I said, since the whole idea is that ghosts are meant to be extreme emotions given form, reducing them down to the barest emotions just kind of filters them out. So what everyone is showcasing is, the emotions that this pup was feeling just before she wound up biting it, but ultimately the reasons for their emotions are all their own. And so all the cool kids are once more targeting Danny Danny, his friends, and Wolf because they think all ghosts are evil, and Valerie even specifically starts targeting Danny because, well, she's got quite a beef with this kid and is justifiably pissed at him. So things are going from bad to worse, and unfortunately Valerie, with her increased strength, is actually getting a lead up on Danny, which, as a result, their battle ends up taking them to a house of mirrors as Danny realizes he has to find a way to try and calm Valerie down. And he basically he thinks that since she's been infected with these ectoparticles, I'm going to call them, maybe he can use the Fenton thermos to get them out, which he didn't want to use it, but at this point he has no other choice. But Valerie is not listening, as she's still angry at Danny for all the shit he pulled, for lying to her, for making her like a pawn in a game between him and Vlad. What I like is that in the midst of all this struggling, Danny doesn't deny it. He admits, he didn't talk to Valerie because he thought it would be weird. He thought it would be awkward. He thought because he was just trying to hold on to some bit of normalcy. In fact, he even apologizes for ignoring her. He shouldn't have ignored her after what happened in A Glitch in Time. He should have talked with her, but he wanted to hold on to some bit of normalcy, and he regrets that, and he's sorry. And what I love is that even with all this bare emotion, Valerie is still not listening to him. Not because what he's saying isn't getting to her, but because she doesn't have a reason to trust him. Like I said, her whole life has been ruined by ghosts, and part of the reason why and what I love too is that this tit for tat does basically have them both kind of throwing all this shit both have pulled on each other. To Danny kind of bankrupting her dad's business, from her hunting Danny for sport, to Danny lying to her about his life, to her not listening to him even when he wanted to talk to her. It's all really good drama, and I think it's executed perfectly. I know I'm not giving specific examples, but it's a great tit for tat. I love seeing these emotions expressed by these two. And it's exactly what I want. Them finally clearing the air. And of course, the only reason they're doing it is because they're now in an actual physical fight. But I like that they're finally talking about this shit. because shit like this does need to be talked about sometimes, because the more you let it fester, the worse things get, as we see with Danny and Valerie in the story. But ultimately, through the entire battle, Danny does apologize, and he manages to, and when Valerie basically has him in a chokehold while Danny flies her into the air, he manages to filter all the angry emotions out and blast them as an ectoblast, which results in the pair of them end up falling to the earth. As such, from there, when the two of them reach the ground, well, who should meet them there but Paulina, who is still obviously crazy, but she has the net launcher and wants to try and use it on Danny Phantom with Valerie once more getting in the way. But Paulina pretty much just tells Valerie, "Get out of the way. You're either with us or you're against us." And Danny even asks Valerie, "Do you really want to be friends with these people? Do you even like them?" And Valerie admits, "No, not really." Which I'll talk about when I get more to the character stuff. But yeah, this finally allows Valerie the clarity that she needs, because part of the reason why she's been giving Danny the cold shoulder, why she's been embracing her status as a ghost hunter like this, is because like with Danny, she was trying to grasp at what she lost. Before, again, in the beginning of the series, she was one of the cool kids, one of the people on the higher social totem pole, and the only reason that she lost that status was because her family went bankrupt. And now here she is in a position where she could be a cool kid again, but she realizes that being cool and doing the right thing are not synonymous right now. And I like that, and I like seeing that revelation come through. Regardless though, Valerie ends up basically siding with Danny, which her friends don't like, but thanks to the intervention of Sam and Tucker, they are able to hold them back. As such, they end up smashing the device, and Valerie thinks that she can probably repurpose it to try and expunge all the residual ecto energy from her friends. And as such, Danny basically acts as point man as he flies around and gets them all rounded up. Valerie, Sam, and Tucker end up working together to assemble the device, with Valerie realizing that Sam and Tucker knew from the beginning that Danny was half a ghost, which does lead to a bit more awkward emotions that sadly do need to be addressed. But eventually, Valerie, Sam, and Tucker end up reworking the device, even working in the Fenton ectothermos. And basically, what they do, they end up using it on the cool kids, and they manage to suck out the residual energy from them. As such, they're all knocked unconscious, and everything seems to be all hunky-dory now, but it's not like things are all good either. You see, again, the pup is still gone, they can't really undo that. Or can they? Turns out that Valerie thinks that if she can repurpose the device, then maybe they can consolidate all that ecto energy together, and possibly use it to reconstitute the being. And again, it's technobabble that I don't want to repeat by looking back in the book, but basically, Valerie ends up reworking the device and reconstitutes all the ectoparticles in the Fenton thermos, and sure enough, the pup is restored back to life. And it's actually pretty nice and sweet, and she's obviously a ghost, and she even ends up, when Danny goes to see her and actually thinks that it's nice that she's okay, she actually does reveal her name. Her name? It's Laika. She actually talks, so she actually trusts Danny, and it's some nice stuff. Unfortunately, though, when the dust settles Valerie does end up going up to Wolf and Laika, and she can't undo what she did, as she's beginning to realize that not all ghosts are truly evil, and that there is a bit more she can learn. And even she admits that her feelings on ghosts are still complicated. But at the very least, she's not going to hunt these two anymore, although she can't promise that Amity Park will be safe for them if they choose to stay. At least there's not as much tension in the air, but things seem to be calming down, only for Danielle to arrive on the scene and basically call Danny and Co. out for giving Valerie a second chance. Because, well, earlier she eradicated Laika. Why would they want to even give her a chance now? Danny, of course, tries calming her down, saying that things are still complicated now, and he even brings up everything that happened with Vlad. But when Danielle hears that Danny didn't do anything to stop Vlad in the last book, she was like, "What? You let him go?" And Danny, of course, tries to tell her things are different now. But Danielle isn't hearing any of it. She just doesn't understand what's going on. Things are changing too fast for her, and she can't comprehend it, and all she wants is for everything to go back to the way they were, and so she just runs off. And unfortunately, she's not alone, as we see Dark Danny still tailing her. As such, Danny realizes that he has to give Danielle some breathing room. She needs space to register all this. But in the meantime, the group realizes they need to do something with Wolf and Laika. But thankfully, Sam thinks she has an idea. You see, she has a secret room back at her house, which apparently she uses to scream out her emotions. Yeah, there's something there, but we're not going to get into it. But she thinks that it'd be a perfect place for Wolf and Laika to basically hang out, as all the ghost tech in her house was taken out by her parents as a way to spite Danny's family, because apparently they still don't like the Phantons. As such, Wolf and Laika are moved to this room, and Sam, Danny, and Tucker decide that maybe they can use this room as like a safe haven for any ghosts they're trying to help, rehabilitate, and so forth. And of course, Wolf and Laika are going all into it because it's a padded room and it's got punching bags and so forth, and they're basically dogs. They like chewing on shit. It's nice. I like that. But now that the group is finally having some alone time with Wolf, they suddenly start questioning about what's going on. And Danny was able to figure this out early on. I didn't mention it because of all the stuff happening in the book. But the reason why Wolf was hiding out with Laika, it's because Walker's on the move. If you remember well, in Wolf's first appearance, Walker was using him as basically his watchdog, so to speak. And so obviously Danny thinks that Wolf might want to try going back. That Wolf is on the run like he is because he's trying to stay out of the ghost zone. Well, apparently it's a lot worse than that. Not only is Walker on the hunt for Wolf, but he's also on the hunt for Danny. You see, Walker got wind of what Danny did in the last book, finding the source, getting ultimate power, wanting to be the bridge between the human and ghost worlds. And he's not for that. He thinks it's against the rules, as he puts it, and so he wants to do everything in his power to make sure that this bridge between both worlds is never built, that both worlds stay separate. And so, Walker is building an army of ghosts to invade the human world and come after Danny. So, yeah, that's something to look forward to. But Danny's friends assure him that they'll stand by no matter what. Wolf and Laika and pull everyone in for a hug. And thus the story ends as Danny and Co. end up sitting outside Sam's house, basically resolving that whatever may happen, they're going to make sure, they're going to try and keep everyone, they're going to try and stand by each other. And Jazz even comes around and asks, hey, did I miss anything? And they tell her, yeah. Although there is one other thing that should be mentioned, Danielle. As with everything going on and how complicated everything's gotten, she doesn't really know if she wants to stay with Danny. I mean, she needs time to process all this, and it's not like she's alone. Like I said, she has Dark Danny. And he doesn't exactly want to go back to Vlad either. He kind of wants to be on his own. And so the pair of them decide that they're just gonna be running away together. And so that's the last we see of them in this book. So yeah, I know I probably jumped all over the place in the plot summary. In my defense, this is the first time I read this book, which that's a mistake on my part. I wanted to read it once before doing this vlog, but that's poor planning on my part. What can you do? But even with my craptastic plot summary, what do I think of Fair Game? Honestly, it's still a really damn good book. I do still have my personal nitpicks and hang-ups with the book, don't get me wrong. One of those nitpicks is unfortunately one of the same nitpicks I had for A Glitch in Time. Namely, why can't Danny's parents be in on the secret? I still don't understand that. I know they're dumbasses and can be a little close-minded, but when it comes to their kids, they are very understanding and willing to learn. So I think that if Danny came to them and explained what he saw at the source, then they'd be a little more open to it. I could see them being resistant to it and possibly clashing with Danny about it, but at the end of the day, Danny is still their son. They love him, they trust him, and I do genuinely think they would hear him out and eventually be won over. Yeah, they'd still be kind of massive dumbasses at the end of the day, but at the very least, they'd be supportive dumbasses who are doing everything they can to help their son. It's stupid that they're not a part of all this. With that said, one of the reasons why I think this book is really good is because if A Glitch in Time felt like an epilogue of the original series, then Fair Game feels like a new beginning. Okay. So one of the comments I gave to A Glitch in Time was how it wrapped up a lot of the loose plot threads that were left hanging at the end of Danny Phantom. And what I like about this book is that it basically continues wrapping up plenty of those threads, specifically the stuff with Valerie. I complimented A Glitch in Time for how it didn't forget about Valerie's existence and did have her be a part of the action. Which, yeah, things weren't fully resolved with her, but it was at least better than what we had. And the ending of A Glitch in Time implied that there would still be more drama to be stewed up with her. But the thing is, what I like about this book is that it continues wrapping up more of the loose character threads left hanging with her, namely her complicated relationship with Danny and where she truly stands as a person and as an adversary for Danny. And I love the conflict there. I love how, like with the series, I love that it's still a shade of gray with her and Danny's relationship. Because when it comes down to it, both of them are in the wrong in some regard. Both of them have done shitty things to each other. And I love that the book goes into detail and addresses many of the problems the pair of them had in all their confrontations. That Danny could have told her about his secret but chose not to. How Valerie was always a pawn in everything. How no one ever talked to her. How Danny just sat back and let her life go to hell. Or how after the Disasteroid incident, he never went and talked to her about the fact that he was a superhero and just ignored her presence. Hell, at the end of A Glitch in Time, she is rightfully pissed off that Danny and co were just willing to let her stay behind and forget that Danny was a superhero, even though she just fought tooth and nail alongside them to save reality. Of course she's gonna be pissed about that, and you can understand why at that point she would grow why her animosity towards Danny would grow like that. Yeah. And again, going back to A Glitch in Time, one of the problems I had with that book was how Valerie was acting more adversarial towards the Fenton clan. And it didn't make sense because I thought at that point, well, she can trust Danny now. But given the context that we got in this book, it makes sense why she would be as adversarial as she was. Because despite the fact that now knowing that one of her biggest hunts was her ex-boyfriend, you can understand why she would probably want to talk with him, and him actively avoiding her would probably rub her the wrong way. And then add on what happened at the end of A Glitch in Time. Of course she would basically be pissed at him. Yeah, she'll do him the small luxury of not spoiling his secret identity because in this new timeline he's public enemy number 1. But at the very least, you can understand the animosity between the two, and it actually is built up really well. And something that I do like, and so honestly, I like that throughout the story, we see the fallout from this. We see how this banter, how this clashing is affecting both characters. I love that we see Danny and Valerie trying to fall into old patterns, but things are getting more and more complicated. And the fact that both of them are leaving so many things left unsaid is just making the situation worse. They're not trying to patch anything up. They're trying to roll over and pretend it's not there, which I hope in the end of the day just caused a lot of bumps in the road that's just going to lead to a very uncomfortable ride. So I love but the thing is that the tension feels very natural for them. You understand why they're going. You understand where the drama is coming from. And yeah, both are being stupid, but it's perfectly in character for them both to be stupid about this. And I love that. And ultimately, by the end of the story, when they get into their final confrontation and they finally have to talk and address these emotions, it's really damn good and leads to really great character growth on both sides. As Danny acknowledges that he was in the wrong for just leaving Valerie in the dark and lying to her so often, but then likewise, Valerie has to admit her own faults, that she took her anger out on someone that didn't deserve it, and likewise, her going back to the cool kids is just her trying to reclaim something that really wasn't worth fighting for. Because these people abandoned her when she was down on her luck, when she had nothing. And now she's just doing everything that she can to regain their admiration, even though they're really not worth it. It's not. I ultimately, and I love that personal and seeing Valerie realize who her true friends are, that she really belongs with the Losers Club, and it's nice. I love that, and it leads to her actually growing as a person, and it's genuinely well written, genuinely well done, and it's all capped off by the finale, which I didn't mention the plot summary because again, bad memory. But one of the things I liked is that going back to how Danny wanted to get the time medallion away from Valerie. His justification for it was that they needed to get it back to clockwork because it's part of time itself. He needs it, and Valerie wasn't giving it up. Well, by the end, Valerie willingly hands the medallion over because at this point she wants to start trusting Danny, and he gives it back to her, telling her that he wants her trust, but that needs to start with him trusting her. And so he lets her keep it, and I like that. It's nice, and again, while it's clear that not everything is good right now, they're both Danny and Valerie are on the path to mending, and it's sweet. I love stuff like that. I love the fact that when Valerie basically comes to terms and realizes what ghosts truly are, that they are just raw emotions and that they aren't just evil, they're not just monsters that need to be exterminated. I love how she deals with it, because like with Danielle in the story, this is a new reality that she has to come to terms with, and it's something that that's going to be hard to adjust to, because up until now she saw ghosts as nothing more than monsters that need to be annihilated. And now she's learning that they're basically raw emotions that need to be cared for and helped and basically talked down. And it's like, it's hard. Let me put it this way: it's like you've been making a building using hammers and using screws for the most part. But when you're getting to the higher levels, you're told, okay, now you have to start using nails. It's a little weird, and it's a little weird to adjust, and that's probably not a good analogy. But I guess a better analogy would actually be changing societal norms. The thing is, as we as a society continue to grow, our definitions of what is right and what is wrong will always change. There are some things that are always going to be universal truths. Be kind to others. Try and understand others before you judge them. Don't be selfish. Help where you can, etc. There are always going to be societal truths that we go by. But the thing is, what we as a society see as normal and acceptable tends to vary and change. And when things do change, there are people that look at what came before and try and hold on to it because the idea of changing scares them. And so to learn something that they thought was okay for so many years is suddenly wrong. It hurts them because in some regards, they don't want to be the bad guy. They don't want things to be more complicated. They want things to be how they were because back then they were the good guys. And as a result, of these clashing ideologies, things can change, and people who were once friends can become enemies. But at the same time, there are also those people who are basically in this other camp, the one that doesn't want to change, who start to change, who begin to actually understand the wrongs of what they've done in the past and decide they want to take the steps to try and be better. And it can be a very tight rope to walk, because you're trying to reach the other side and try and become a better version of yourself, but you're still holding on to all these biases and opinions that you used to think were fine, and are trying to navigate them and realize which ones were good and righteous and which ones are vile and hateful. And I like that they showcase that with Valerie here. She hates ghosts for some justifiable reasons. The struggles with the ghosts wound up ruining her family, and of course the prominent one is Danny Phantom because he was always at the forefront of all that shit. But now here we are But now here she is, finally able to talk with Danny, for her to finally clear the air, and she learns that ghosts truly are not the monsters she thought they were, and it's hard for her to come to terms with that. And I love that. I love the conflict there. And so to see her basically try and figure out try and make amends for the bad things she's done while trying to and actively try to change, I think it's sweet. I love it, and I love the conflict that's created from that. Likewise, though, I love what we see with Danielle in this story. I love that she basically embodies the mindset of the person that's stuck in the old ways but doesn't know how to change. But in her case, what makes it better is that she's a child. Well, Danielle is not just a gender-bent version of Danny. She's younger than him. She is a kid who basically thought that her whole existence was defined by fighting ghosts and beating up bad guys and doing all the things that the original Danny Phantom did. And she she just thinks, oh, I'll just keep doing that shit. I'll go hang out with Danny and we could be kick-ass crime fighters together. Only when she runs into Danny, this is after he's had his epiphany. And ultimately, of course, she's not going to... And odds are it's going to be hard for her to grasp what Danny's new change, because she wasn't there when he went to the source. Of course, she's not going to fully comprehend this. But at the same time, seeing her trying to struggle and trying to navigate all these changes is actually pretty harrowing, and it makes you feel so sad for her, because it's basically a scared kid whose entire life has been upended. Everything that she thought she knew is now wrong, and she doesn't know, and she doesn't want to accept that. Because she's a kid. Kids have a hard time dealing with that sort of thing, because that kind of shit can hurt them. They are used to normalcy. They're used to things a certain way. So to have it all be upended, have the rug pull out from under them, it can be emotionally torture. Or it can be emotional torture. And we see that reflected perfectly with Danielle. She wants to be in Danny's good graces again, but seeing the way he's doing things now is just terrifying to her, because it basically means that what she's doing is wrong. And it basically and as a result, a divide is formed between her and Danny. And as a result of that divide, it pushes her away from the people that were her friends into the arms of people who are trying to bring out her darker impulses, i.e., Dark Danny. And I love that, because Dark Danny is basically the antithesis of Danny. Because Dark Danny, even though he's trying to turn over a new leaf, is still Dark Danny. There is no love lost between him and this new world. He can't stand Vlad as a parent. He can't stand being powerless as he is. And if he had his way, he would just nuke everything from orbit. But he has to deal with it. He's stuck in this frail human body now, and he just has to sit there and deal with it. But then enter Danielle. Basically a female clone of him, a female clone of himself, who's basically on the lam and trying to understand the world. And honestly, I do like that he doesn't know who she is at first, because the split between Dark Danny's timeline and the main timeline came before Danielle was even conceived. So there was never a Danielle in his timeline. And why would there be? Vlad got what he wanted. Danny became his adoptive son, and then that got fucked over when he separated Danny from his ghost half. Of course he wouldn't have created Danielle. He wouldn't have had a reason to, and likewise, after Dark Danny blew up his house, he wouldn't have even had the resources to. So it makes sense why there wouldn't be a Danielle. But I love their relationship in this. I love that Dark Danny is basically being the little devil on her shoulder and trying to urge her to take a darker path. Not trust anyone. Be on your own. Be on your own. People will just hurt you and all that. And I love that. It's scary. It's actually pretty damn scary. Like I said, the image of Danielle backing away from Danny and Valerie and basically backing towards Dark Danny is genuinely terrifying. Like, yeah, even if Dark Danny doesn't have any real power at this point, he now has a mind to manipulate. A naive child who is trying to understand the world, and where the world is going is not the place that she wants to be, because it conflicts with what she was told, what she was taught, and she can't comprehend it. She's the kid who wants things to go back to the way they were, but now the people that she thought that she could trust have changed too much, and now the only person she can rely on is the guy telling her, don't trust anybody. It's terrifying, but honestly, I love that. It creates a great sense of drama and opens up new avenues for the story to go, where things could go for Danielle and Dark Danny, because like I said, by the end of the story, they're still hanging out together, and it's really and it's nice. I love that. I love seeing that. And honestly, I mean, like I said, the inside I saw Dark Danny in the book, I freaked the hell out. And seeing him and Danielle in the same, basically sharing scenes together, just goofing off, exploring the carnival, and Dark Danny, of course, helping Danielle to commit all these petty crimes. I loved that. I love seeing them work off of each other. Both of them in some way are copies of Danny. Well, I mean, Danielle is a clone. Dark Danny is basically his alternate future self from a doomed timeline. In a way, both of them are Danny, But at the same time, they're not Danny, and and basically their respective positions do make for some interesting stuff. As Danielle is far more impressionable and doesn't fully understand her role in the world, and likewise has not gone through the same things that Danny has gone through. And Dark Danny, meanwhile, has 10 years of experience under his belt as a destroyer, and now that he's powerless, he's basically trying to find whatever he can. He's basically trying to find any bit of freedom and power he can, and and ultimately, I love that we see him basically kind of grow attached to Danielle, because odds are he still feels lonely, and while he's technically Vlad's son now, at the same time, he really does not want to deal with Vlad, which I love that every version of Danny just can't stand this guy. It's great. I love it. It's just fun stuff, and it's just the things he complains about. It's just amazing. I don't know why. I love seeing Dark Danny for just freaking out about lasagna night. It's fun stuff. I dig it. So that in turn opens up new pathways for the story to explore. And quite frankly, if there is a sequel to this book, I want to see where that tale goes. I want to see where Dark Danny and Danielle's paths take them. Will Dark Danny drag Danielle down into the depths with him? Will Danielle help Dark Danny rise up because now he's found someone that he can confide in? I don't know. I don't know which one where it's going to head, where the story's headed, but I'm eager to find out, and I love that. But likewise, another strength of the story, in my opinion, is how it practices what it preached in the last book, namely Danny trying to be the bridge between the two worlds. And the thing is, while I bitched and moaned about the ending to the last book and how it was basically status quo is God again, this book does. I think what I like about this book, about Fair Game, is the fact that I was kind of wrong. I mean, not completely wrong, because there are some things that were true in the series that are also true in this book. Danny and his friends are still low on the social totem pole. The cool kids are still vapid airheads, and what I love is that after they woke up from them being affected by Laika's essence, they were wondering what the hell happened, and they're running, and their minds are all blank. And then Lancer basically comes up and says, "You broke all this shit. You're fixing it," which I love. But the thing is, the story also is clearly trying to go in new directions with the setup it was given, and it's good. I think it's really good. Yeah, we still have two-dimensional dumbasses for characters in certain points. Again, going to the cool kids, but when it comes down to our main characters, the situation we're presented with is one that is complicated. It's not because. Again, going back to the struggle with trying to learn this new way of doing things, it makes sense why everybody is having growing pains. And we understand why Danny is struggling to try and connect with other ghosts when he's been so used to punching them. The divide between him and Danielle feels very real, as while both clearly care about each other, they're in two very different states of mind right now, and unfortunately they're not compatible. I love the conflict with I like the conflict with Valerie, and likewise, I love seeing them, but I love just seeing everybody having to confront these emotions and figure out what they mean for them as people. I love seeing I love seeing Danny struggling like he did. I love seeing Valerie's conflict. I love the divide, and it leads to a story that doesn't have a clear good guy or bad guy. It's just a bunch of people trying to figure out what the right thing to do is, and trying to make amends for wrongs that they all did. And I love that. It leads to a story that is very nuanced, very much mature. It feels like it's more than just a standard kids cartoon. It actually feels like something that's trying to open. That's actually trying to create. It's just more nuanced. It's just nice. It's just more nuanced and just all around very much a much more competent story, which I think is good. And I'm not saying that to say that the stories in Danny Phantom were not competent. God, no. I still enjoy Danny Phantom as a cartoon. I'm just saying that it's nice to have a story where things are more complicated. And again, there is no clear villain in this book. Everybody, like, there's a conflict to be sure, but ultimately ultimately, there was no real villain per se. Valerie is the closest thing to an antagonistic force in the story, but even then, her conflict feels very natural and you understand her motives. She's trying to reclaim something that she felt she lost and is trying to get back into the world that threw her out. But then likewise, everything that happened with Danny is still a thing, and her feelings towards Danny are very natural. Of course she would feel betrayed. Of course she would be angry at him. All of that works. And yet by the end of the story, now nobody's in the wrong. Even Danielle and Dark Danny, I wouldn't even call villains in the story. Neither, like, okay, yeah, you could, oh yeah, there's the beginning of a thread for them, because like I said, Dark Danny is basically encouraging Danielle to act on her darker urges and trust nobody. But at the same time, like I said, the conflict with Danielle is not quite villainous yet. She's just in a different state of mind from Danny, and because she hasn't experienced the same things that Danny did, of course she's not going to fully understand why Danny has changed as much as he has, and I like that. It's genuinely nice stuff. Plus, of course, there's the stuff with Wolf and Laika. I think they're nice. Okay, I think they're nice, and it's not as fully as while they don't go as fully in depth with their relationship. I do like seeing that. I do like seeing more of Wolf and more stuff with him. In fact, the fact that Danny is seeing a familiar face in the story in the form of Wolf actually makes what he's trying to do in the story actually that much better, because Wolf is one of the few ghosts that he's on friendly terms with. But the thing is, since Amity Park is on such an anti-ghost kick, of course no one's going to want to talk to Wolf. And the fact that he now has Laika by him does not make things better, especially since Laika is a bit more temperamental than Wolf, which makes sense. She's a scared child. She doesn't know what the hell's going on. Which I think leads to some very nice conflict, because here we have our main characters trying to basically calm everyone down and keep everything in line and try and get people to talk. But then likewise, you got trigger-happy morons who are ready to shoot at anything that looks weird, and then you got people who over here who are scared, who could very much turn into weapons of mass destruction if they are so much as poked the wrong way. It's again makes sense. It leads to some very interesting and honest and some honestly very tense moments, even when things are calm. I like that. I like seeing that. And ultimately, and finally, the thing that I think makes this book work well as a new beginning is that there's no definitive end. I mean, okay, the conflict in the book is resolved. Valerie is on the road to learning that she is on the road to becoming a better person. Danny is, of course, confronted some of his demons, and Wolf and Laika finally found a place they can call home without fear of people going after them. But then likewise, we still have the stuff with Danielle and Dark Danny. Both of them are still on the run, and both of them are still clearly going to be up to stuff. So that's something that needs to be addressed. Likewise, we now know that Danny's actions in A Glitch in Time have more long-lasting consequences, since Walker is aware of what Danny did and now wants to go after him and stop him from bringing together the human and ghost worlds. So that's an impending disaster that's waiting to happen. But at the same time, the fact that the characters are still willing to stick with their mission, do the right thing, and try and bring both worlds together, I think it's nice. It's some good stuff. And at the end of the day, I think it leads to and makes for a good new beginning. It's not the same status quo we had before. It's our characters growing and learning new lessons and trying to become better people as they enact those lessons, as they try to help out those they once considered foes. And honest to God, I think that's really damn good. Seeing these new plot threads be left out hanging and making us want to see where they go, how they get wrapped up, or what patterns they'll weave into. I'm interested in seeing where they go. I want to see a sequel to this book. I want to see how things develop. I want to see Danny become the bridge between the worlds. I want him to stop being public enemy number one. Which, by the way, it's kind of dumb that the cool kids who once praised Danny Phantom as a hero now are ready to still consider him a public enemy, which I don't know. It just feels weird. Like, they praised Danny Phantom to hell and back in the original series, but now that everyone says, oh no, he's actually evil, they just turn on him? I don't know. But then again, these are very vapid airheads and dumbasses, so I could fully believe that they would turn on even their greatest hero, even though in the last series, when they learned that Danny Phantom and Danny Phantom are one and the same, they're actually willing to cover for Danny when the government was after him. So I don't know. It's just weird. My point is, though, that Fair Game is, in my opinion, a very good follow-up to A Glitch in Time. Like with A Glitch in Time, it wraps up plenty of the loose hanging threads that the series left out, namely in the case of Valerie and Danny's relationship, but likewise, it feels like a new status quo is being established, one that is more complicated than the original series. It's not just find bad guy, beat up bad guy, go on, but at the same time, there is a very interesting what I love is that it creates new status quos for our characters. Danny is still trying to be the bridge, and as part of being a bridge, he has to confront his feelings and emotions. I love seeing the conflict with him and Valerie as Valerie has to go on to be a better person. There's plenty of loose threads left hanging as Danny and co realize they have to try and help as many ghosts as they can when they come to Amity Park. And then likewise again, the stuff with Dark Danny and Danielle and the complicated emotions associated with that make for some interesting drama. Makes you want to see where their relationship is going to go and how things will play out. And add on the added threat that Walker's going to be coming back with an army of ghosts intent on taking Danny down and stopping her from being the bridge between worlds. I like it. It's really good stuff. And overall, I think it makes Fair Game more than a book that is more than worthy of being a follow-up to A Glitch in Time. It's not just an epilogue to the series anymore. This is a brand new beginning, and there's going to be a lot more new challenges for Danny and his friends to overcome, and I want to see them all, and I want to see it play out. So, yeah, overall, I recommend Fair Game. If you haven't read it yet, give it a shot. You'll probably get a much better understanding of the story than I described it. Like I said, this was the first time I read this book. I wanted to read it at least once before doing this vlog. I'm just stupid at time management, so I never even got the chance. So, what can you do? But ultimately, regardless of my various mishaps in summarizing the plot, I hope you did enjoy this video. As always, I'm Samuel Johnson, and next week we're going to be starting up a new vlog series, one that I'm a little bit excited to do. It's another show from my childhood, it's another Nickelodeon show, and it's also a little topical considering what happened with one of the actors, but I'll wait till next week in order to go into more details. But with all that out of the way, I hope you enjoyed seeing me rant and rave. As always, I'm Samuel Johnson, and I'll see you next time. Take care.